But let me just talk for a minute about the work with kids. There's two reasons for this. One is the one I've mentioned several times. If we really want to understand learning, we all have to go back to our innate understanding of learning before school. So that's one reason to always anchor this on children. You want to understand learning, watch a 3-year-old, watch a 2-year-old, watch a 1-year-old. It's an amazing testament to learning. And you realize it's kind of inherent. This system, this, as the Chinese would say, mind, heart, body system, is designed to learn. The species isn't particularly fast. We're not particularly strong. Why do we survive? Why have we survived? One obvious reason is we're extremely good at learning, individually and collectively. So that's one reason to work with children. But there's another. And that is that while business is the most powerful institution in modern society, to me, without question, school is the most important. It's the only institution that has a 50 to 75-year time horizon. Right? There's an old saying in traditional Chinese culture that the mark of every golden age, and of course the Chinese look back over many millennia, so they have golden ages and they have many not so golden ages. So they have a very interesting perspective looking over very long time periods. They always say the mark of every golden age is the children are the most important members of society, and teaching the most revered profession. We all know that all societies struggle with how to balance the short term and the long term. From a systems perspective, one of the first problems you always encounter is that you can do a lot of things that make things look good in the short term, but make things much worse in the long term, because you're basically sowing the seeds that you reap later on. Ironically, in many organizations, the managers who do that have moved to another job by the time the problems come home. So short-termism is a huge problem in our society. The overemphasis on the short term. Political dynamics tend to reinforce this, whether those are political within an organization or in society. Because it's how we look. It's the perception of being in control. I can solve these problems. But of course, oftentimes my solutions end up producing many more problems much later. And one of the core problems we have politically all the time is that, you know, whoever's on the job now either gets the blame or credit for it's going poorly or well, when in fact the real causes may be over the last decade. Okay? So it's a core issue from a systems perspective, how we balance the short term and the long term. And I think this is the other reason that working with education is so important. And this is, I've thought a lot about that old Chinese saying, the mark of every golden age. And I think another way to understand it is that when the children are the most important members of society, you have a foot firmly planted emotionally in the long term. Otherwise, the long term is just a concept. Oh, we know this is kind of stupid, probably there'll be a lot of problems down, but there'll be somebody else's problem. It's just an intellectual exercise. The way to express this from a learning standpoint is how do we create emotional connection to the future? When the future, in some sense, by its nature, is an abstraction. We create an emotional connection to the future when we connect with a child. A conversation with a child is a conversation with the future. All of a sudden, it becomes very real to us emotionally. What will the world of this young person be like? So that's the other reason for the focus in education. The surprise from the last 10 years of many, many people bringing systems, social emotional learning, project-based learning. There really is a revolution, a renaissance of sorts occurring around the world in education. Most people don't see it, but believe me, it's there. We have a major new effort at MIT called the World Education Laboratory. And basically what we're trying to do is draw attention to all the extraordinary innovations that are going on around the world. In China, they call it the flipped classroom. How to take the teacher out of the front and put the student in the front. I have a good friend who's developed a method where children teach each other algebra. Literally, in teams. The whole course is children working on problems and teaching each other algebra. He's the teacher. He never talks more than 5 minutes in any class. And a lot of times he doesn't talk at all. So you see these innovations going on all around. And I use algebra as an example because as someone who's trained as an engineer, it's really important to recognize the sciences and mathematics also can be done with radically different pedagogy. And it's happening around the world. And it's very encouraging because the future of our societies, in some ways, will be shaped by the future of our education. Now, I have prickly feelings about this as an American. I actually believe a lot of the political difficulties we have in America today have their roots in the deterioration of our system of public education over the last 30 or 40 years. Our society is very poorly educated to deal with complex problems. So naturally, we want a simple solution. A famous American writer who once said, "For every complex problem, there's a simple solution." And it's wrong. But we love that simplicity precisely because we're very undereducated. We're very undereducated culturally. We have very little appreciation of other cultures. We have very little appreciation of how to deal with complexity. But the big surprise of the last really over 20 years for some people, but I've been very involved with this for the last 10 years, is that when you immerse children in understanding complexity, it's actually quite easy for them. It's very natural for them. They grow up in families. Families are the archetypal complex system, and they know it. How do they have so much influence, even though they're so small, and they have no power, but they run the whole family if they don't understand the complexity of that system? Okay? So I do believe that this is absolutely key for the future of this work. Bring the systems perspective to the natural learners. Okay? And lastly, I'd just like to make one little closing comment on this individual versus collective. Because it's a kind of a good theme, again. And my way of thinking about everything we're doing right now is we're just trying to touch on some of the key themes, some of the core questions that you can carry with you over these 2 days. Yes, in most of our Western, we often use the term Eurocentric cultures, cultures that have their roots, particularly in Northern Europe, and that's, of course, most of the United States, very individualistic. It's the nature of the cultures. They're highly individualistic. And much of the learning that we're really aspiring to in our organizations has to do with teams. So practically speaking, we always look for how do people coming from an individualistic culture start to relate to a team. So you just ask them, when have you ever been part of a great team? People will think of, oh, well, when I was in high school, we had a music group, and it was wonderful. And the kind of what we did together, or I was part of a theater ensemble, or I played on a sports team, whatever. Even in highly individualistic cultures, people usually have some deep experiences of being part of a team that really worked as a team. 90% of the time, they'll be either in performing arts or sports. And either are equally good. What did you learn from that? How can you carry that into the work setting you're in now, particularly if it's practical to have our team learn better? A lot of the fundamentals of this work in practice and practical settings is transforming how teams work. But you have to find an emotional hook again, something that makes it real to people, not just an intellectual idea. But it is a core challenge, and I appreciate bringing it out. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you.